Hi everyone, my name's Nick, and in an attempt to put some new stuff onto my blog and also clear through the backlog of just games I've bought over the past few months and things like that, I'm going to start doing some unboxing videos and things like that. What I'm going to do is essentially break the first rule of unboxing today and look at something called Puppet Wars Unstitched, the re-release of the Weird Miniatures Puppet Wars game that came out a few years ago. This one I got excited about and opened up really early, so instead of doing a strict unboxing or look at the new shiny things and things like that, I've also got the original Puppet Wars here, and I'm going to compare them as we go along. Basically, this is a game that came out a few years ago. We'd had it full of metal miniatures and components, everything like that, and recently, or not so recently, they were talking about it for a while, re-released it in plastic with plastic miniatures, an updated set of rules to make it a bit more streamlined, and newer components, newer box, things like that. So popping open the box, first thing I noticed about this when I actually bought it wasn't any of the components, it was the fact that the box itself was a lot better quality than the last one. You'll notice this one, apart from being hard to open, is actually a pretty thick box, and compared to the original one, which was just generally a normal cardboard box, feels like the same kind of cardboard they had their crew boxes coming. This one feels a lot sturdier and is pretty robust. I'll just move these to the side for the moment. Like I said, I did get excited and opened these fairly quickly so that I could look at all the shiny things inside. Okay, so the first thing in this box that I'll look at is actually the board. It was given a bit of a brighter colour scheme in my opinion, and just cleaned up, made a lot bigger so that it's a lot more, on a lot larger of a play area, and just, yeah, made generally a lot nicer. Not to say the old one wasn't nice, but this was just an upgrade for the original board. In terms of size difference, the original board was a smaller one, bit less colours, and it was just, it suited the purpose at the time, but this one made it a lot easier to move everything around. It just sort of feel a lot more like a board game that was a large scale board game, I thought, instead of the standard board game that had come in the original one. Other thing in here are the sprues of plastic miniatures that they've put in here. When this was updated, they actually put enough in so that of the master's sidekick and pawns that you get in the box, you'll actually get the choice of 3 different masters in here, being, probably can't see them in this anyway, but you've got Justice, Seamus and Pokey Vic. You've also got a few different sidekicks. Essentially the henchmen in Malifaux have turned into sidekicks in this. They're the more powerful pieces that you can use, one of each in each game or on each side. Not up to the skill level of, say, a master, but still pretty heavy hitters or buffers depending on what you want. They've also released the pawns in this box. Instead of having one unique pawn like they did in the original game, they've got 3 sprues here which have the same pawns on them, so you don't have to run through a bunch of boosters and things like that just to duplicate the ones you really like the look of and things like that. You can pretty much run with what's out of the box as a very large crew, and you get a decent range of minis in here, and they are really nice. Yes, they have made them into multi-part plastics, and I think they're similar quality to what they're currently doing their current plastic ranging. I'll come back and have a look at these later and compare them to the original models and things like that. Other thing in this box, obviously, when it's opened up, there's a fairly large sponge area. That's obviously helped protect those miniatures in transit and things like that. One other thing that came in this that wasn't in the original one for the obvious reasons, a set of instructions for actually putting those minis together. A few of them in the original box were a bit odd in terms of, especially the Death Marshal. There were bits on there that could be put on the base or the back, but no one was really 100% certain how it was done. Having said that, these minis are fairly simple from the looks of things to put together, and at the same time are actually designed, from what I can see, to click into place. So if it wasn't bought by an experienced hobbyist or even someone who's been in the hobby for a little while and knows their way around a plastic kit with clippers and glue, they're able to pick this up and pop it together to get the pieces up and running. Another thing that's in the box here are counters. These are all exhausted counters for during the game. When you're going through, the puppets use an action, they get exhausted during the course of it, and they're just basically used to mark who has moved, and if they have activated, they'll take further steps, or if they take further steps to activate later on, they can suffer damage. These, in my mind, are probably the lowest quality that's in this specific box. Having said that, if I pop one of these out, they're on reasonable cardstock for what you're using them for. They're probably slightly thicker than the crew boxes and things like that that we'd have for their original metal boxes, things like that. But at the same time, a lot of people getting this game are either going to use these as is and won't be too worried about them, or for serious collectors and hobbyists, they're probably going to start making their own tokens and things like that to customize it as well as all their miniatures. In comparison, the counters that were originally in the game, there were a lot more of them. That stuck, combat +1, paralysed, the original exhausted there. They're made of the same quality, so in terms of that being the weakest component in the box, it's not actually a setback. They've actually gone and put the same counters in there. The advantage with these original ones is that they've just narrowed it down to needing exhausted counters now. The game doesn't require a dozen different counters that you might need to convert or build your own if you did want to do that. You can just run with the standard exhausted counters, or you can just mark them with buttons or things like that, which are easy to come by and fit the theme of the game pretty well. Other thing in the book, the single rule book. Originally in Puppet Wars, the original one, it was 2 rule books, and while it's still got the original story in there, it's got a lot of the fun little art pieces that the Puppet Wars game was inspired by originally. And this is actually one of those games that when I picked it up the first time a few years ago, I had to read two books to understand it and get the rules. This is one book. It's got a quick reference guide on the back, probably a bit more complex than some games, but compared to others, it's probably not nearly as complex as the really big games you can get. The other advantage with this is that there are optional rules in the back, and at the same time, a lot of the back pages are devoted to the maps and things like that for the different ways you can lay out the board depending on how many players you've got in the game. The thing here is that when you start looking through, the rulebook is actually that half of the book. You don't need to read the entire thing to come to grips with the rules. From here onwards, it's optional rules and a few sample lists, things like that, and maps. So at the end of the day, what looks like a decent sized rulebook for an in-depth board game, like I said earlier, not a huge amount more that you'd need to read compared to any other board game or quick reference game, or quick reference chart, sorry, for any other board game. It's not actually as complex and a thicker rulebook as you think it might be on first glance. The rules themselves are really well laid out in this version. They've got some nice big text. Everything's clearly pointed out. A lot of these things you'll actually remember where it is in the rulebook based on which puppet you saw near it originally. And yes, I read this in a few breaks at work, and it probably took me 30 to 40 minutes to read the entire thing very slowly. So it's actually very easy to get the gist of the entire game. In comparison, the original Puppet Wars rulebooks, like I said, 2 rulebooks, the rulebook and the pattern book, and you've got your quick reference chart there on the back. If you look at the 2 ones there, you'll notice they've crammed a bit more information onto the new one from the looks of things, but I don't think it's really a great deal more. This rulebook originally, similar rules, similar art, things like that. I wasn't really expecting a great change between the 2 rulebooks anyway. It did clear up a lot. They have made it a lot less complex in terms of the different styles of actions. I think it's actually managed to move away from Malifaux, in terms of this was an add-on to Malifaux at first almost, with similar actions, the zero cost actions with the lightning bolt actions in this and things like that. The game has got a lot quicker and more streamlined. The pattern book originally in the first one had the same information, but it did go into a lot more examples which aren't listed in this rulebook in the new one, but at the same time I don't think they're really needed. The other thing the pattern book did in this version was give you a lot of tutorials on how to play the game originally, to get your hands onto the different mechanics of the game, and the way they're laid out in the rulebook, I think taking those examples out was actually a good idea. They're not really needed, and if you have a question about something, it's quick and easy to find in the rulebook, and it's very clearly laid out so you can understand it. Other thing I did notice with this, actually, in terms of a random thought I had, they're actually done with different binding. The new book is just glued and bound where the original ones were folded and stapled. That, in my mind as well, makes it feel a bit more of a sturdy book. It's not one that I'm going to say it should be in hardcover, it should be in some kind of special slipcase or something. It's a rulebook for a board game, and for a rulebook for a board game, it's really nice quality and actually designed to last a fair bit, I think. Other things they've got hidden away in the box here are the puppet decks inside here. These aren't, well, they're no different to the ones that were in the original game. That came with 2 puppet decks as well, 1 for each player. This box plays for 2 people as is, but with the addition of more puppet decks and a few more puppets. Probably even the same puppets you get in the box, you can go up to more players. And these are, well, like that. These are the plastic coated Puppet Wars cards that you've been able to get for a while from Weird. Even before, I believe, the original Puppet Wars was released, you were able to get these cards. So it's the same art, same quality, and again, as components go, this is a really nice hardware and component for this game. I really wouldn't expect these to break down in any kind of extreme situation. They're actually really nicely done, and I think this was, when these came out, these were a nice step forwards in terms of Weird's production for things like Fate cards and things like that, so that everything now, all the Fate decks are up on that quality. By comparison, I'll get out my original puppet deck for the original game. I sleeved these myself, but you can see there, it's the same artwork that came out originally. It's no big surprise, and yes, same thing. They were just decent cards to get in there to actually run the game with and be able to depend on them lasting a while. All the other components for this game are actually hidden under this little tray here. I thought that was a really nice idea, in all honesty. I do look nowadays at board games, the way the boxes are laid out and things like that, just to see if there's anything that could be done differently or it was planned differently, anything like that. There's Rogue Mini that's gone floating around in there. So what you've got in here are the new tokens for workbenches and impassable terrain. These are really nice pieces. I'll get the comparison pieces out for the original game, and they were a few bits of coloured plastic. You could use up to 4 players in this, and while these did perfectly well for what they were expected to do originally, they were also things a lot of people on the forums, not long after it came out, were building their own impassable counters, their own workbench counters, things like that. These ones look like they're laser cut. They've got some really nice images, either lasered into them or engraved in them. Come in a few different colours, and you've just got the different workbenches, impassable terrain, things like that, so that you can play with a few different people straight out of the box. And as you can see, there's a few different colours there. It's used for claimed workbenches, impassable terrain, and you've also got the grey neutral workbenches there. I'll throw a few of these online on my blog and just put them on white paper so that they can show up a bit better. These were a vast step forward in terms of what the last game was, I think. Like I said, the last counters, they served their purpose, people made their own custom ones. They weren't very special, they didn't feel really unique to the game. these are definitely unique to the game. They've got the same symbols they use in the rules. They're easily identifiable and just nice bright colours, big chunky pieces to match the new spaces on the new board. And yes, they're just really nice pieces. The only thing I didn't like about this, as I commented to a friend at the time, was the Ziploc bag. But let's face it, anyone who's been into wargaming or board gaming a while probably has hundreds of these lying in wait for every new purchase they make. So I wasn't too surprised. It was just a bit of an aside that the Ziploc bag in here probably won't last more than 5 or 6 games, I would think, but then again, it's going to be replaced anyway fairly quickly. New stuff in here. These are the Puppet stack cards that come for the game. They're slightly different now. They're laminated a bit better in terms of probably closer to the Puppet Wars deck. So they feel like they're on similar stock and similar coating. Haven't tried it myself yet, but they do feel like they've got a level of laminate on them where you could actually draw over those stitches and stuff with a whiteboard marker, or you could mark them with buttons pulling off or something like that, just so that you can see a bit better how many points of damage they're taking, things like that during the game. Again, these were a nice step forward. You've got your master cards there for Justice and Pokey Vic, and a few other ones there. A lot of the things, I'll grab out Justice's card from the old game in a minute. One of the things they've done with this game, they've made it a lot simpler. So the cards all look fairly familiar, but they haven't gone into a great deal of depth like they have in the previous game where, for example, the Pandora card was covered in rules like the original Pandora in Malifaux was. The original cards for the game were a bit bigger. They did take up a lot more space, and like you'll see here, that's a Guild Austringer. I think I saw one of them down there earlier. So they've got a few similar stats, but things have changed in the way the game operates. You'll see here there was pawns and crime fighters. Now this is just a pawn. Its abilities are slightly different. It's got a few different tweaked stats to make the game a bit more playable in certain aspects, and they've just simplified a lot of things as they've gone on here. I do like the new cards a lot better. Some of these I found originally had a few odd white lines running down the side there and things like that that looked like Photoshop artifacts or something like that. These cards seem a lot cleaner. They're just a lot better designed. I think that the amount of space they've got in terms of where they can put the text there is nice. They've fitted everything in without having to go to some strange tiny font, and the giant pictures of the puppets on there really show you at a glance what you're up against when you're running the game. There's Seamus running around in the back there. Same side on the upgrade cards. The text is fairly straightforward. You can pick what these are fairly quickly. Things like stitches, extra stitches, are pretty well highlighted on here as they went. Final thing I've got in this box is the Puppet Wars bases, and these are actually, I believe, the same size as the original bases that came with the original Puppet Wars. So if I pop one of these open, you'll see. So yeah, it's pretty much the same size, and just designed essentially. The puppet clips in there and can play straight away on them. You don't need anything really fancy on there. They've already got the holes drilled. If you're a hobbyist and into miniature games and painting like I am, you'll want to get these up on really nice bases to fit the theme and also fit the setting of the game, make sure the miniatures are properly mounted on there. But at the same time, if this was just a game given to someone who wasn't into these kind of games originally but liked the theme of it, they wouldn't really be too daunted about popping a model onto a base like this, because it is really straightforward, especially with the instructions they've got in there for assembling the miniatures. Okay, what I'll do is, just as a final thing, I'll pop a bit of card up here and try and zoom in on a few of the miniatures so that you can see the difference in quality. So what I'll get here is, I believe the cherub is on this sprue somewhere. I've already lost it. Okay, so there's the wings of the cherub right there. And what I'll do, just to show the size difference, I'll grab one of the metal cherubs that came with it originally. As you can see, it is a slightly larger size, and some of the minis have had a slight redesign in terms of how they look in the game. I'll just try and center this a bit better on there. So yes, in terms of game, what they've done here, they've basically slightly tweaked the design a bit in a few places. They've added things like the tiny pin coming out of the back of it, which wasn't on this one. They've made them multi-part, obviously, so they can cast them up a bit better in plastic. And they've generally just gone around and added small details to them that wouldn't have worked too well in metal. Something like the little pins and things in metal would have been really easy to snap off in transit alone, whereas in plastic it's a bit tougher and it's a bit more protected on the sprue, so they can get away with tiny details like that. Especially if there's a lot more assembly needed, they can do a lot more in terms of the little add-ons and details they can add to this. Like I said, these are designed to be snapped together from what I can see, so it is a big improvement in terms of their production for what it's like and how they're doing the game now. Tomorrow at some point I'm actually going to be able to sit down and play a game of this, so I'll have some photos on my blog and things like that of me and a few friends playing it, and at the same time I'm going to just give my general thoughts on the game. Like I said earlier, I feel they've improved the game a lot, and they're going from strength to strength in this one, I think. So yes, that's my look at Puppet Wars, and yes, hopefully I'll do a lot more of these in the future and get some more stuff on my blog. Let me know what you think.